We have an excellent panel of presenters today, and unfortunately our first presenter, Mohamud Yazbak, was unable to join us, and so Professor Sambal will be reading his contribution.
Just stop me because this is his paper, so I can't conclude or anything like that. But he told me to read from page 1 to page 7, so that's what I'm going to do. It was kind of a shame he's not here. It's a wonderful paper, and we really wanted him to be here, but he could not make it. So, okay, Professor Mahmoud Yazbak, he's from Palestine. He's a Palestinian. The title of his paper is Women's Agency and Sharia, Challenging Patriarchy from Within, Cases from 19th Century Jaffa, Palestine. Okay. First part of the paper is titled State of the Art and Innovation. During the last 2 to 3 decades, women's studies related to Islamic studies have taken pride of place among social historians of Islam. Many of these studies reveal many new insights about women's lives and living conditions within their families and societies. The sijils, Sharia court records, found in all Islamic cities became an authoritative source that helped researchers looking deeply into these societies. One salient aspect, however, has to some extent been neglected. In patriarchal society they belong to, what strategies did Muslim women adopt to contest traditional male authority? So this, I guess, is what the subject's about. Sijil records have served researchers to produce important studies about Islamic societies in general and women's studies in particular, especially but not only about the 19th century. See, for example, in the bibliography, studies of Tucker, Jennings, Rapport, Colin Imber, Leslie Pierce, Graham, Zilfi, Sonbol, Merriweather, Deguillem, Mauguiron, and Dupré, Powers, and others. However, many aspects related to women history and studies still are awaiting to be studied, and I agree with them. Women's strategies developed in a patriarchal society are rare and waiting for deep and serious studies. The suggested study looks for women's strategies by making use of Islamic law and local customs of contesting patriarchy in Islamic society. Through my many studies about Palestinian society, I make wide usage of the sijils of different Palestinian areas, including Haifa, Nablus, Jaffa, Nazareth, and my research will look into women's strategies within Palestinian society in general, with specific reference to Jaffa, because of its particular social composition, being a cosmopolitan Mediterranean port city. The sijil of Jaffa is my main source for having a deep study of one locality, the city of Jaffa during the 19th century. Jaffa or Jaffa has served as Palestine's main port city and attracted many immigrants from the Middle East and the Mediterranean. Thus, Jaffa comprised population groups with many different origins: Palestinians, Egyptians, Moroccans, Syrians, Lebanese, Europeans, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and others, creating a truly multicultural society. It is very interesting to understand how Muslim women acted within these diversities and how it affected her daily behavior. My suggested study is one step forward in a long road. I hope that this study would open the field for other researchers to follow. Methodology. The main primary source for the study is the sijil records of Jaffa from the 19th century. A copy of these records is stored on my laptop. It's cute. I'd like to get my hands on that laptop. These records contain about 60 volumes. Wow. Each contains an average of 250 pages. Through my previous studies, I have read many of these records, and I'm reading now the rest. A research assistant is helping me to allocate particular documents that are related to women cases. These cases will be reclassified in order to allocate them and connect them to women's strategies in Jaffa. The relevant sijil cases will be studied and analyzed to establish a deep and well-organized study of the different strategies developed by the women. Theme. Researchers of Middle Eastern societies agree to the lack of symmetrical relations in the Sharia Islamic law between women and men in general, and husbands and wives in particular. The study looks at two main issues: the Sharia's flexibility to adapt itself to changing situations and circumstances. This flexibility is enabled by different factors such as local social customs and muftis, interpreters of the Islamic law. The limits of male authority, especially within marriage relations, particularly the unlimited male power to divorce at any time and without offering justification, was challenged. Islamic legal discourse worked to soften male unlimited power to divorce by defining material male rights. Indeed, a husband enjoyed the right to divorce his wife for any reason. And though there were a number of rules governing the husband's material obligations to his wife in the wake of such divorce, the sums which were rightfully for the wife under divorce, talaq, included a maintenance allowance, nafaqat al-idda, for 3 months, her delayed dowry, mahr al-mu'ajjal, and if there were children, a children's stipend, nafaqat al-hadana, for both mother and nursing infants up to 2 years, and an allowance for clothing and necessities for older minor children. A woman seeks to annul a marriage fasq because of basic defects in marital relationship must be dealt by court and could only be granted by a Muslim judge, a qadi, in an Islamic court setting. Though a woman could not divorce her spouse when she pleased, legal discourse provided her a way to leave an unwanted marriage. A wife could ask her husband to divorce her in return for compensation, khula. Such a divorce required the consent of her husband and entailed material sacrifice on her part. Usually in khula cases, women gave up all material rights they could get in a husband's initiated divorce, and in many cases, women even compensated the husband against his cooperation to accept the khula with different additional sums. Usually, khula cases were registered in the Sharia court's register sijil to avoid future misunderstandings. However, khula procedure constitute a recognition of a wife's own reasons to leave a marriage. The repeatedly khula cases appear in the sijil points that husbands usually refrained of talaq to save themselves of material losses. No. Against that, it points also that in such cases, women were ready to give up their marital rights to get free of an unwanted marriage. However, sijil studies show that women have developed strategies to push the husband to grant a divorce without losing or giving up their material rights. This strategy is known in Islamic social norms as activation of a divorce by an oath or activation of a conditional divorce. Examples of this strategy could be found in all Islamic societies. In Palestine, we might encounter examples in different sijils, but in the second half of the 19th century, it became a widespread phenomenon in Jaffa, more than in any other Palestinian town. Jaffa. Looking into sijil records of different Palestinian cities shows that women's strategy to activate conditional divorce was not much widespread phenomenon. However, the sijil of Jaffa from the 19th century suggests a different picture. The phenomenon is scarcely mentioned in the volumes of the first half of the 19th century, but as we proceed towards the second half of the 19th century, we encounter more and more cases of this kind. It becomes clear that this strategy became well profound in Jaffa. The special social structure of Jaffa society contributed much to the widespread of this phenomena. Jaffa was Palestine's main port city. The town's enlarging economy attracted continuous waves of immigrants. Usually many of these immigrants were males who were attracted to the town by the large economic opportunities it offered. It seems that this reality, more than any other factor, made it possible for women not to fear divorce. Usually a divorced young woman in Jaffa could remarry easily and in a short time. The sijil of Jaffa leaves us under the impression that in unsuccessful marriages, husbands preferred to annul marriages through the khula system. Of course, women did not prefer the system, but accepted it as a last resort. However, when it was possible, women usually preferred to put an end to unsuccessful marriage through the talaq system initiated by the husband. If this was not possible, women usually planned to reach their goal of getting divorced without losing their economic rights by making use of the conditional divorce system. Conditional divorce system, now he's going to talk about that, is a divorce or a talaq that results from an oath of the that the husband has sworn. The power a husband enjoyed to divorce his wife at will was underscored by the jurist's acceptance of the divorce by oath or the suspended divorce. That is, of the practice of a husband taking an oath that made talaq conditional on a future event or action. A man could swear to divorce his wife if she behaved in a certain way. A man could swear that if he did not perform a certain act, or if his wife did or did not obey some command, or even if some unrelated person did not fulfill an obligation, then he would divorce his wife. Once the act in question had been committed or omitted, the divorce was automatically effected, regardless of any change of heart on the part of the husband. Once the oath was sworn, it could not be retreated, and divorce became contingent on whether or not the condition of the oath was fulfilled in due course. This type of divorce or threat of divorce appears to have been, in part, an accepted form of male social control, rather than a way to resolve intractable marital problems. Men did have almost unlimited powers to divorce their wives, and further could employ the oath of divorce to secure compliant behavior from their wives and to other people. Women's strategy here. The legal position that divorce pronouncements, once uttered, had the full weight of law, enabled wives to force their husbands to honor such pronouncements, even those made lightly or in jest, if it seemed to a woman's advantage. From the point of the legal discourse on divorce, such a provision signaled the graveness of any talk of divorce. A husband had the right to repudiate his wife, but he must beware. This was not a right to be exercised casually. If he misspoke, he could be held to his word by a wife who had been waiting for just such an opportunity to leave him and to keep her marital rights. Clever wives who looked for an opportunity to end an unwanted marriage without losing marital rights might take the opportunity of an oath of divorce uttered by the husband in a fit of rage to drag the hot-headed husband into court, have a rash oath of divorce certified, and thereby escape an unhappy marriage at no excuse to herself. The woman's activation of divorce by oath reflects her understanding of her husband's reaction when this authority is publicly contested by her. Usually in such cases of contestation, wives had the upper hand, i.e., wife achieves her goal, pushing her husband to divorce her without giving up her marital rights. Here are some examples to clarify this strategy. You are not permitted to leave your home. That's the example he has here. A certain Amina regularly visited the shrine of Abdel Nabi, located 2 kilometers north of Haifa. The visit of this shrine was an accepted norm among the women of Jaffa, who believed in his blessings and his power to heal. In 1875, a short time before the annual visit of Abdel Nabi's shrine, Amina made her last preparations for the visit and informed her husband about her intention. For an unknown reason to us, her husband, Ali, refused to allow her to take the visit. His refusal caused tension in their marital relationship and big quarrel. She told the court, during the quarrel, and in order to impose his decision on me, my husband Ali made an oath and pointed to me saying, you will be divorced 3 times if you go to Abdel Nabi during the upcoming annual visit. 5 days after her husband's oath, she disobeyed him and visited the shrine of Abdel Nabi. The husband approved the case, and the Qadi judged and pointed to him, your wife Amina is divorced of you by 3 consecutive repudiations, and you may rehabilitate your marriage of her only after she marries someone else in an intermediate marriage. Contents of this case shows clearly the husband's attempt to control his wife's behavior and to impose his authority. This authority starts from the point where he controls his wife's behavior. She needed in advance his permission to leave the house, even for a short visit. Shrine visits in Jaffa's region was an accepted and a well-known practice, especially by women. This practice is coined by the well-known saying attributed to women of Jaffa, take me to the shrine of the Prophet Reuben to divorce me. This saying includes deep social meanings and demonstrates the importance of the shrine visit and participating in social recreation activities taking place during the visits. It seems that Ali's refusal to allow his wife to visit the shrine of Abdel caused a serious dispute with the husband, and the wife expressed her intention not to accept his authority in this field. Amina insisted on achieving the shrine's visit, confronting the well-known social norms that wives do not leave the home without having the husband consent or permission. To emphasize his authority and impose his will, the furious and contested husband resorted to the mighty weapon, swearing if she visits Abdel-Nabi's shrine against his will, she is thrice divorced. I'll stop here. There are lots of other examples. If I may just take 1 second, I think this shows an incredible amount of problematics, within, and I'm hoping we're going to get a discussion about this. I'm really sorry Dr. Yazbak isn't here. We would have had, him and I would have had a little bit of a quarrel, I think. But I thank you very much for listening. So.
Thank you, Professor Sambal, for bringing us the spirit of Dr. Yazbak's paper. Just as a reminder, he's a professor in the Department of Middle Eastern History at the University of Haifa and lives in Nazareth. So thank you very much. So next we'll move to our second speaker, Ummul Fayiza. She's a researcher at the Center for Political Studies at Nehru University in New Delhi, and also the author of several publications, including 2 chapters in the Malayalam book, Malala Counter Readings. She's a regular commentator on Muslim issues for various newspapers, weeklies, and websites. She's an activist for various issues related to Muslim women in India. Her research interests include gender, religion, women's movements, law, and citizenship.
Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank Georgetown University, School of Foreign Service in Qatar, and the organizers of Writing Women's Life Annual Conference 2016 for giving me a great opportunity to participate in this conference. In this paper, I'm trying to locate women's activism to reform Muslim personal law in India. I divide my presentation into 3 sections. In the first section, I will speak about the political context of women's movement in India in relation to personal law. In the second section, I will analyze the activities of 2 Muslim women's groups, that is Awaz-e-Niswan, which means Women's Voice from Maharashtra, and Muslim Women's Jamaat from Tamil Nadu. In the third section, I will read the similarities between these 2 movements and the global Islamic feminist politics. The political context of women's movement in India in relation to personal laws. It was during the colonial times that religious personal laws started operating in India. Post-colonial Indian constitution officially recognized the personal laws of the 4 communities, that is, Christians, Muslims, Parsis, and Hindus, which includes Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, tribes, and scheduled castes. Civil matters concerning marriage, divorce, inheritance rights, maintenance, alimony, and the custody of children are covered separately under these community personal laws. Keeping aside the differences between them, personal laws of all communities, by and large, can be found discriminatory towards women. So it has generated debate on the question of women's position in relation to citizenship rights and community rights. In the specific context of India, realization of uniform civil code has been the chief agenda put forward by right-wing Hindu forces and a section of secular feminists. They strongly advocate the implementation of uniform civil code to save minority women as a means of removing the privileges of minority men. At the same time, Muslim community leaders defended any attempt to the reform of personal law. For example, All India Muslim Personal Law Board members, which is a non-governmental body established in 1973 to the protection of Muslim personal law, and different Muslim religious groups believed that similar judgment can cause gradual demolition of the sanctity of community or religious identity. I argue that all of these debates reduce the question of Muslim women's rights either to a women's issue or as a crisis of Muslim identity. Many Muslim women activists were discontented by these abstract narratives of Muslim women and decided to form separate Muslim women's groups. By 1990s, a number of Muslim women groups started to flourish across India. These Muslim women's rights groups put forward the objective of Muslim personal law reform to achieve gender justice. Emergence of Muslim women's activism to reform Muslim personal law. In late 1980s, at the wake of Shabanu case, a number of Muslim women activists have begun to form organizations across the country. They complicated the narrative of both Islam and feminism by advocating for Muslim women's rights. Most of these movements were located in urban areas and were led by a group of educated, upper middle class Muslim women. This presentation identified them as autonomous Muslim women's groups. Interestingly, the two women's groups I choose to study were born out of the efforts of two individual Muslim women who are Shahnaz Sheikh and Sharifa Khanum. Their personal experience and commitment towards gender equality and justice have had significant role in the formation of respective women's groups to empower the Muslim women. Shahnaz Sheikh's disappointment with the approaches of community leaders and mainstream women's groups led her to form a separate women's group, Awaz-e-Niswan, in 1987. This Mumbai-based movement held various campaigns on inter-community harmony, violence against women, and police brutalities against Muslim community. They also provide services like literary classes, training, marital counseling, and support in domestic violence cases. Even though Awaz-e-Niswan has been engaging with the issues of Muslim women in the larger framework of women's rights, it was open to women from all other communities. The organization openly denies the label of Muslim, and instead it would like to present them as a women's group, even though they focus mostly on Muslim women issues. Awaz-e-Niswan also joined hands with the local and national and international feminist groups. Unfortunately, Shahnaz Sheikh left the organization in 1993. Instantly, the remaining members came together and carried the movement forward. The organization has handled over thousands of cases since its formation. It has retrieved dowry articles, helped women gain custody of their children, and has even helped women to get financial assistance. They also use different strategies of dialogue, help from neighbors and the local religious court or Jamaat, police, and civil courts. And Sharifa Khanum, founder of Tamil Nadu Muslim Women's Jamaat, started her activism in 1980s. Subsequently, she met with people who have similar concern, and in 1991, they formed a non-governmental organization called STEPS, which means Steps to the Empowerment of Women. STEPS works on the issues related to domestic violence, abuse, and discrimination, along with providing emotional and psychological support to women. The organization was open to women from different communities. In between, STEPS has been receiving a lot of petitions from Muslim women about the injustice of Jamaat. Jamaat is a community of leaders in village mosque, which is dominated and controlled by male members who adjudicate on family matters. Sharifa Khanum and her co-activists have found that Jamaat's activities cause huge violation of women's rights. The Jamaat is a place where women are not allowed to enter. Women cannot give their side of story or hear judgments in cases that intimately involve them. So they decided to form a separate women's federation, not only for freely discussing their views, but also for the better understanding of problems and for their adjudication. Consequently, Tamil Nadu Muslim Women's Jamaat formed in 2004. Since then, the activities and meetings of both STEPS and Tamil Nadu Muslim Women's Jamaat were held at their office at Pudukkottai district in Tamil Nadu. Interestingly, over the years, Tamil Nadu Muslim Women's Jamaat members have been planning a mosque exclusively for women, which will be a significant step in the history of women's movement in India. In doing so, I would argue that both Awaz-e-Niswan and Tamil Nadu Muslim Women's Jamaat tend to provide an alternative framework to locate the subjectivity of Muslim women in India is similar to the global Islamic feminist trend emerged in the 1990s. Muslim women's movement and Islamic feminism. Women scholars and activists from Muslim contexts during 1980s started to argue for a feminist politics based on Islamic norms. Initially, it was a challenge for these scholars to introduce the term feminism within the Muslim community, partly because feminist politics was considered as Western, modern, and colonial import owing to the troubled history of Muslim communities with colonialism. Due to this reason, many Islamic feminists, such as Maimuna Mahmoud, refused to identify themselves with the label of feminism. This is a struggle that also resonates with the context of Awaz-e-Niswan and Tamil Nadu Muslim Women's Jamaat. They identify with many important political goals of contemporary feminism, but does not want to identify with the label of feminism. The struggles and negotiations of Islamic feminists largely centered on the framework of the religious personal laws prevailing in the society, which has a great role in regulating and reproducing the gendered lives of Muslim women. Their activities were emerging from a commitment to the imperative of gender justice in Islam, especially the works of Islamic feminist legal scholar Ziba Mir Husseini and Aziza Al-Hibri. Similarly, the activists from Awaz-e-Niswan and Tamil Nadu Muslim Women's Jamaat proposed a number of reforms to end discrimination against women on the grounds of gender justice in Islam by reforming existing Islamic law, which includes implementation of Faske Nikah or Kul, through which a woman can claim for extrajudicial divorce without her husband's consent. Secondly, any enactment of an act to make triple talaq void, and the implementation of Nikahnama. These movements recall the verses of Quran to provide an alternative framework of Islamic feminist ijtihad. In their argument, the problem lies with the male-dominated leadership within the community groups, and not with the central ethical principles of Islam. For example, see how women's activists address the issues of triple talaq and polygamy. Sharifa Khanam argues, Quran warns against the mistreatment of women and unequal treatment of wives. According to Quran, only those who can do justice to his wives can marry more than one. Another women activist, Hasina Khan, asserts that if you are talking about triple talaq in one sitting, then I believe it is un-Islamic, it is a customary practice. These Muslim women activists negotiate with the patriarchal authority in the community by revoking justice from the Quran. In doing so, they are redefining and reconstructing the lives of Muslim women beyond the communitarian or liberal secular perspective and propose a feminist politics based on Quranic hermeneutics. Unlike Awaz-e-Niswan, Tamil Nadu Muslim Women's Jamaat moved a step forward to claim the authority to intervene in the personal matters of Muslim women, as argued in the work of Islamic feminist scholars such as Keshia Ali and Amina Wadud. They negotiated directly with the local Jamaat members as well as the both parties involved in the case. After the years of engagements and discussions, the Women's Jamaat succeeded in granting the divorce of a Muslim woman, Amarunisa Begum, from her abusive husband in 2011. For the first time in the history of India, a local Jamaat approved the authority of Women's Jamaat to dissolve the marriage. In short, these Muslim women's groups have formulated alternative ways to define the lives of religious Muslim women, and also they tend to provide a new meaning to feminist politics in India, which often views Islam and feminism as incompatible to each other. By following the reinterpretation of religious texts and through collective action, they shape new forms of personal and political agency for Muslim women. It in fact falls into the global trend of Islamic feminism, which took a significant effort to move beyond the binaries such as public, private, progressive, backward, or liberal, conservative, and secular religious. Thank you.
Our next panelist is Asma Abdel Halim. She's an associate professor at the Department of Women and Gender Studies at the University of Toledo, where she teaches courses on gender, women's issues in non-Western cultures, particularly African women and Muslim women's legal and cultural issues. Her current research project is looking into Sudanese laws from a feminist perspective in an effort to read, record, and analyze the various constituencies that governed the evolution of laws in the country and laws that directly affect women's rights, such as personal status laws and criminal law.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And I support and second all the thanks that have been expressed here to the organizers of this great conference. My research in this part of, thank you. For this presentation, I decided to just confine myself to the criminal part of it. I had actually both the personal status, but the speed of that piece of paper calls for some preservation. I started to look at the laws affecting women and how those laws are drawn using my feminist eyes. And I noticed that these laws, and I want to start as far as Dr. Ummul started at Hatshepsut. I will spare you the matriarchal Nubian kingdoms and start just about 100 or 130 years ago. These laws kept changing, but in a circle. What happened 100 years ago is happening now, and it happened 50 years ago. So why are those laws confined and boxed, and just the changes are there? Well, as the Americans say, something has got to give. It is not just by chance, right? So what is so special about those laws being just revolving for 135 years? Well, the understanding of Sharia has a lot to do with it. Understanding of Islam and how Islam treats women has a lot to do with it. Understanding of the colonialism and the colonial periods that Sudan went through also has a lot to do with it. And Sharia actually always women's status and women's rights have been governed by Sharia. Even when we had contracts laws and torts laws and all those laws that are changing every day with the life women have been confined to Sharia. And Sharia was applied, of course, according to the eyes of the person who is trying to oppress women. And it is a culture of the law that grew inside a wider culture. And this wider culture is a patriarchal, masculine culture. So everyone comes in, and according to their understanding of the Sharia, it is not just something to control women, but it is something that honors manhood and treats oppression of women not just as a byproduct of honoring manhood, but also as a vein that feeds that manhood. And it is a vein that feeds that manhood because masculinity is always juxtaposed to femininity. So to define masculinity, you have to do femininity. And they say, well, masculinity is everything that this is not. And this is, I think, my own thinking is that because of this wider culture that surrounded women's status, then we ended up with laws that generate acceptance or sometimes resistance, but not expressed resistance, because anything outside that culture will be discounted as antisocial, if not outright blasphemous. So what is manhood in the Sudan? Manhood in the Sudan, I don't think it is different than manhood anywhere. So it's a result of masculization of all spheres, public and private, although public and private is fading away now. But I am using it here to just explain. Women are relegated to the inside, and I'm not saying to the private sphere, because men share that private sphere. And we keep saying men are in the public sphere. Well, they are not sleeping on the streets. They come back. and they share that private sphere, and they create their own space in that private sphere. So it is manifested in two ways. Masculinity depends on characteristics that are not feminine. So if you say to a man, can I say your mother is courageous, and she's strong, and she's generous? So absolutely, have you seen her? No. But can I say she's a man? No, she's not a man. But these are masculine descriptions. So in a way, women can have those, but in the feminine version of those things. And equality for women was possible only through the slogan, Islam has honored women. And how Islam honored women, I think if you go to YouTube, you will be surprised. And I think it is just a long thing that I won't get into now. What about the history? What about the colonial history? Let me start at 1820, when the Ottoman Empire decided that they wanted to go into the Sudan. And of course, they wanted to go into the Sudan through Egypt. And Egypt, I think all the Egyptians here may agree with me. Egypt had this strange autonomy. No matter who comes or goes, thank you very much, we are Egyptians. It doesn't, they don't give away that autonomy. So they came, and in the Sudan it is called the Turkey Sabga. And the main purpose was to get strong men. Of course, they were living under the myth that black men are the strongest men. So when they enslaved them and mistreated them, they died in droves because of mental things, that they have never been treated this way where they were living as black, and because of the mistreatment of the malnourishment and everything. And they were totally surprised that black men could die. So, so then they gave it up in a few, and the other thing was the gold. So they were able to get the gold, but not as much as we're getting now. So in 1881, an armed rebellion against the Turks, dubbed Turuk, was organized by a Sufi Muslim called Muhammad Ahmad, and he called himself Muhammad Ahmad ibn Abdullah al-Mahdi. He called himself al-Mahdi al-Muntazar, the awaited, enlightened one. And the ironic thing about this is it was an Islamic revolution against the largest Islamic empire at the time, the Ottoman Empire. Well, finally in 1885, the Sudanese were victorious, and they took over, and the Turk had to leave. And not the first Islamic state, because there were a couple of states before that they were Muslim, but Al-Mahdiya was an Islamic state within the past 135 years that I'm talking about. It was founded. So Sharia was used all over the place. Everything has to be subject to Sharia. However, Al-Mahdi al-Muntazar placed himself in the position equivalent to the Prophet's position, and he sort of tried to discount 12 centuries of scholarship. And Sharia was what he said. And all men are women, and it was also a political convenience for the Mahdi to say all women are free to travel alone from wherever they are coming from if they are coming to join the Mahdiya. And they are free to join the jihad if they wanted to, the jihad for the Mahdiya. And every woman who comes here without her husband is considered an infidel, she is divorced from him, we will marry her here to one of my Ansar, which happened to so many women. But what happened once she got there and married to one of the Ansar, that freedom was no more. She is confined to the home 24/7, 365, and if she dares to come out, anyone can take a whip and send her back into that home. And also, he continued the institution of slavery that was left behind by whoever was coming for slaves. And of course, women was the most expensive slaves for their services, sexual, reproductive, and domestic work. So this also continued to be part of the oppression of certain women who are called the slave women. And the Hajr was only for the free women, not for the slave women. Already? Okay. Can I see that? So women were excluded from the legal system. They were not mentioned except by way of being disciplined. Okay. From 1899, the British also came through Egypt. They told the Egyptians, hey, you have to take over the Sudan. Once it was taken over, the British took over. And they ruled by a treaty with Egypt. They didn't do much regarding women because they were not interested in that, and a promise was made to the men that we will not touch that. Okay, what happened? I'm going to jump to 1989, which I called progressing backwards. This is where we went back to 100 years ago regarding women. And this was apparent, very brilliantly apparent, in what is called the Zina rules. The Zina rules worked against women, all the way against women. Pregnancy is enough to say a woman has committed Zina. And we have to work, of course, on that. Finally, after 26 years of opposition to how rape was legislated in the criminal law, the rape was said to be deemed to commit the offense of rape whoever has sexual intercourse by way of zina or sodomy with any person without consent. So first, if a woman comes in to complain of rape, she will have to prove that it wasn't zina, which was a heavy burden. And that heavy burden was, people were fighting it. Finally, through the European Union and the United Nations, they put a different definition of rape. However, for the punishment, they left the punishment with whoever commits the offense of rape shall be punished with 100 lashes and with imprisonment for a term not exceeding 10 years unless rape constitutes the offense of zina or sodomy. كأننا يا بدر لا رحنا ولا جينا. As if we haven't done anything, all that stuff about a new definition of rape being without consent, and not just sexual intercourse, it can be done in any way. All that was in there. However, when it comes to the punishment, we are back where. Also, the Evidence Act was not amended in any way. There is also a public order that's only for Khartoum, and it is against indecency, and indecency has always been, the place of indecency has been women. No man has ever been brought in for indecency. University students were being flogged, everything. And when it came to ridda, or apostasy, also there was a channel to get them to women. And there is a famous case, the case of Miriam or Abrar Ibrahim. They found out that she was married to a Christian man. It turned out that, yes, she was born to a Muslim father who left her to her Christian mother. She brought her as a Christian. She brought her up as a Christian. And they said, well, no. Your father is a Muslim. You're born a Muslim. You continue to be a Muslim. And she said, I started a revolution. Continuing it is on you. No. So they found a way. Men in the Sudan have always brought wives who were Hindus, Buddhists, atheists from Russia, and even from South Sudan, believers in their own ancestors' religion. no one has ever been brought before a court that says, well, you are a Muslim, you are only allowed to marry a Christian or a Jew. And that could be considered a ridda from Islam. No man has ever faced this. A woman did, and the judge said she is to be executed because marrying a Christian man. Note that she said, I am not a Muslim. Her being a Muslim has been imposed on her by someone who thought she should be a Muslim, and accordingly passed that judgment. So 130 years ago, women were left without any agency. Here we have a semblance of agencies that could be taken any time by anyone who thinks it should be taken away. Women are punished personally. However, acts against them, such as rape, is considered a breach of honor. Rape is not put with the grievous injury to bodily harm or mental harm. It is under honor. So a raped woman has her honor taken away through no doing of hers. And the sheer fact that this a section remains under crimes against honor, one against fadila, that makes women always subject to it, because where does the honor of a man reside? In women. He can go out and get drunk and fornicate, do whatever he wants. That doesn't make him a dishonorable man. However, why he can go out and do that? Because his honor is safely stashed at home. That is the honor he has to take care of, not his own honor. And I think I'm going to abide by the rules and leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Asma. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions for you in the coming discussion. So our final panelist is Maimuna Mahmoud. Maimuna is a researcher with the Heritage Institute for Policy Studies based in Mogadishu, Somalia, and also an independent consultant. Her research interests include migration in the Horn of Africa and gender and politics, with a particular focus on the Somali regions. She is currently undertaking an evaluation of the Somali Sustainability Fund's investments, focusing on appraising the program's adherence to principles of equality, gender, and gender responsiveness.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my presentation this afternoon is going to draw on a two-year research that I've done in different parts of Somalia, also with my colleagues. And particularly, we've done numerous life history interviews that will lay out the basis of this research and some of the findings that I will present to you. Women's activism has taken different paths since the independence of many Muslim-majority countries in Africa and Asia. And contemporary Somalia offers a valuable case study to show the dynamic and non-static nature of women's activism and the ways in which women transform not only their strategies, but also their stances to be able to adapt to changing social and political realities around them. In the 1960s and 1970s, for example, many Somali advocates used and primarily draw on liberal feminist ideas and frameworks to demand and push for constitutional and secular legal rights. Though many of these women were actually aware that such frameworks worked best in distinct liberal democratic settings, these women considered them to be quite useful in Somali society that was just emerging out of colonial rule and was deeply influenced by the nationalist politics of the time. Yet over the last couple of decades, many activists and ordinary women alike have begun to visibly distance themselves from the largely secular feminist project of social reform and legal rights that had arguably dominated the social field of women's activism in most post-independence nations across the Muslim world. And today, many Somali women find drawing on Islam-based approaches and engaging more fully with Islamic texts and traditions as a more effective tool for promoting more rights, especially those rights that have been eroded during the Civil War years in the early 1990s to the late 1990s. But the idea of women activists choosing, and I put this word underlined here, to work within patriarchal, religious, and non-liberal traditions have sparked intense questions and debates in the literature, mainly about the extent to which Muslim women can affect change through their work within such traditions, and how to capture and best write about the agency of women who are part of Islamic or Islamist movements. Also quite relevant in the Somali context, how do we make sense of the lives and the particular forms of activism of women who rely on Islamic traditions and approaches without necessarily seeing themselves as belonging to any Islamist political parties or any Islamic movements? To put this in another way, how can we explain and theorize women who position themselves close enough to engage these Islamist discourses while also keeping themselves kind of distanced to be able to critique and challenge them? So in this presentation today, I'll examine a number of narratives that reveal these types and forms of activism, specific to issues that are central to many Somali women today in a time that's considered to be post-conflict and very much about projects of nation building and state building in many ways. So these issues that I'll look at and the narratives speak to political representation, women's role in political representation in government as well as decision-making at different levels. And I argue that these forms of activism are very much in response to the seemingly unchallenged power Islamists have in altering gender relations. Some of these women's forms of activism are very much also speaking to be able to challenge Islamist construction of an ideal Somali woman, which in the process had redefined Somali women's roles, their dress, their behaviors, and even ways in which they're able to express themselves and their opinions. And when we spoke to many women across the Somali region, they seemed to say that all of this idea of reconstructing women's roles and redefining what an ideal Somali woman looks like has affected women's contributions and presence in public life. Let me begin by saying that in much of Somalia today, the immense influence of Islamism in politics and society makes it absolutely necessary to position women's activism within this reality. But it also underpins why more and more women feel that it is necessary to use Islam as a way of resisting the arbitrary and unfamiliar claims Islamists often make. But several scholars like Margot Badran and others remind us that the notion of Islamism itself has to be contextualized, as its meanings, configurations, and practices change over time and in place. And in the Somali context, we see that the usage of Islam as a political instrument dates back to the 1960s, as Somalia gained independence. But it would not be until 1991, when the state collapsed and the civil war began, that Islamists were able to finally gain significant power and control over much of southern Somalia in particular. Of course, the history of Islamism is quite, in the modern Somali nation state, is very complex. But I think what's relevant to our discussion here today is that early Somali Islamists clearly set out ideal gender relations as part of their broader visions and agendas for social and political transformation. And from the onset, many questioned whether women could and should have roles in advancing Islamist agendas beyond those that were ascribed by nature of biology. I think that some of these concerns are still quite relevant for Islamists in Somalia today, and partly contributes to how they construct and continue to reproduce an ideal version of Somali Muslim women. I also argue that there isn't a clear consensus between Islamist groups on this particular issue. suggesting a diversity in how they approach and how each enforces gender ideologies today. Let me give you an example. There's an agreement within the militant Al-Shabaab, for example, that women should retreat from the public space altogether. But there are other prominent Islamist political parties, like the Mogadishu-based Islah Party, that has cautiously but publicly supported some women's political aspirations over the past decade. And we have indeed looked at few examples where Somali Islamist female politicians have been able to hold high-level political office and were actually supported by some of these Islamist organizations and political parties. But I would like to step away from the lives of Islamist women, and I want to focus more on women whose activism particularly lies in distancing themselves from these Islamist groups or parties, and who challenge them using Islamic approaches and frameworks. And I turn to some of their narratives right now. Many of these women believe that Islam is especially susceptible to being instrumentalized today, given the position of Islam as an important force in Somali society. And many have also claimed that such instrumentalization of religion can be best seen in how Islamists use texts and interpretations in self-serving ways, and to also justify the exclusion of women from all forms of participation in politics and in decision-making. Although many women thought it is critical to reject Islamist arbitrary and unsubstantiated claims and interpretations, they thought it was also important to engage them, not alienate or dismiss them. So I'll look at 3 ways in which women engage, negotiate, and challenge Islamist discourses, and I'll keep it very, very brief. First, many thought it was explicitly important to make a distinction between the clan-based patriarchal Somali culture and Islam. And I have a quote here by a prominent and former minister who served as part of the federal government, who says that, I quote, "The main challenge to women's participation in politics is our clan-based society. We have to distinguish between Somali traditions and Islam. Many practices that exclude women today are rooted in Somali culture and not in Islam." And what you see here is a classic, I would think, a classic decoupling between culture and religion, where women, Somali women in this case that we've interviewed, align themselves first and foremost with Islam and think about culture as a more primary cause for women's exclusion. But they also tend to think about the culture of Islamists in Somalia today as an external sort of cultural imposition that is kind of alien to Somali culture. Secondly, many call for increasing women's knowledge and awareness of Islam through an in-depth study of the Quran, of the prophetic traditions, as well as learning the Arabic language. And the rationale here is that women should be able to understand understand Islam more holistically without really relying so much on male scholars or imams that have traditionally filtered and mediated Islamic knowledge. And connected to this idea is a very revolutionary idea, at least in the Somali context, where many women are openly challenging a deeply entrenched dichotomy where men have been the producers of Islamic knowledge and women have historically been the consumers of such knowledge. And women here are very much problematizing that. What is very interesting as well is that many women suggested that it isn't sufficient to increase their own personal understanding and awareness of Islam, but it was also the basis of a broader political project. In the sense that it was equally important to spread this newly acquired and unmediated knowledge to other women. And many women saw this as kind of an awareness-raising campaign through which women can disseminate newly founded knowledge to other women at a national level. A holistic understanding of women's rights and their obligations, as well as limitations within Islam, was seen by some as a prerequisite to women's political demands, any other demands that they wanted to make. And in response to widespread misconception that Muslim women are not allowed or should not hold any political positions, in this quote, a young Somali woman in Mogadishu suggested that Islamic knowledge can actually be used to counter such misconception. She says, some use the religious argument to keep women out of politics. Before women advocate for representation, they should demonstrate that they know where Islam stands on the question, so no one could use Islam against them. Third, and it's going to be the last point here, many women framed their civic and political work as religiously mandated moral responsibility and obligations they had to society. And by thinking of their work as an Islamic duty, some sought to legitimize this work that they were doing, work that is very much associated with male types of work or work that's done in the public domain. And here, indeed, one woman in Hargeisa posed this rhetorical question, which I found very profound. Didn't Allah oblige both men and women to learn? The reason we learn is to give back to society. And here there's a link between education, work, and religious duty that women have to improving the conditions of their communities. And similar sentiments actually were expressed elsewhere beyond Hargeisa in places like Mogadishu and Garowe, where women are increasingly thinking about their public work as work that can benefit in the entire society and therefore is a religious and moral responsibility. I think some concluding thoughts. Overall, the majority of the narratives suggested that there is a willingness for many women to participate in discussions about women's public roles, but according to Islamic teachings and Islamic values, and this is quite important for many, many women that we've come across. We also found that many women who didn't formally belong to any Islamist movements or any Islamist groups still found it quite critical to meaningfully engage them, these Islamist discourses more broadly, through familiar language and through familiar approaches and strategies. I also see that women's use of Islamic framework as a form of activism mirrors similar attempts by Muslim female activists on a global level. And Somali women are very much part of this wider story. Although there has been a tendency to actually write about Somali women in isolation or as exceptional cases to some of these debates. And I think that the narratives that we have explored here and with my colleagues situate some of these lived experiences within the broader efforts of Muslim women across the globe. Thank you.